When I went off to college the first time around, it was a major culture shock and a wake up call. I attended a private Christian college courtesy of a scholarship that was formed with the intention of bringing more diversity to a predominantly white school. As a Latina who's considered white passing, I never was openly treated unfairly as a person of color. Then it happened. A white student called my black friend a racial slur, the N word. He said it casually, but he also said it with every intention of being hateful. The context in which he said the word, it was obvious. He meant it. I didn't know what to do, what to say, how to process this information. The only thing I could think of doing was asking my friend if she was okay. Of course, she said she wasn't. But then she also said, this isn't the first time this has happened, and it probably won't be the last. Since then, I've been doing my best to listen more to Black voices, to do research, and to educate myself. And I've discovered so much information is out there that they're not teaching you in school. Although many consider the civil rights movement to have ended in the 60s, today people of color, specifically Black people, still suffer because of the disparities within the public health system, practices such as redlining, and the disparities within incarceration rates in the United States. Racist practices are deeply rooted and embedded into these systems. This is what is known as systemic racism. First, I'll start with the disparities in the public health system as it pertains to Black expectant mothers. In 2019, the CDC produced this infographic, which illustrates the disparities. In a perfect world, there will be 0 deaths. However, that's not realistic. The fact is, when we combine the statistics as shown here, we're looking at 71 pregnancy-related deaths for women of color and 13 for white women. All of these deaths are a tragedy, of course, but such a large gap is overwhelming. On the subject of gaps and disparities, let's talk about wealth disparities. Most generational wealth was built up through homeownership, which brings me to my next point, redlining. While most white Americans were continuing to build their wealth for generations, Black Americans were continually denied the opportunity for home ownership and land ownership, which have been the most important factors for wealth in the United States. On January 16, 1865, Union General William T. Sherman signed Field Order Number 15, which included an order to redistribute 400,000 acres of land to newly freed Black families. Just months after Field Order 15 was issued, President Lincoln was assassinated. His predecessor, President Andrew Johnson, revoked Field Order 15. The land that these families were promised would be worth approximately $6.4 trillion today. This is an area description created by the Homeowners Land Corporation. This specific one was written for Savannah, Georgia, and I've put up 2 different examples of what the red sections mean and what the green sections mean. They are basically the 2 opposing ends on the spectrum. There's also yellow, but I focused on the red and the green. The red areas are the ones that are considered hazardous or risky for loans, while the areas in green were determined to be lowest risk. As you can see here, based on the words and language that was used, it's obvious that these practices were racist. Loans were rarely given to people who lived in the red, if at all. The majority of people who lived in the red, Black people. The majority of people who lived in the green, white people. Till this day, Black people have been denied loans at a disproportionate rate as opposed to people who are white. One example is this chart from home purchase loans in Philadelphia from 2015 to 2016. As you can see, the gaps are pretty significant. Based on the practices of redlining, we can see how it makes sense that Black people would have had no choice but to stay in the neighborhoods they lived in. Where else were they supposed to go? This brings me to my next point, the practice of over policing communities of color and how it contributes to disparities within rates of incarceration. In 2011, New York City had 685,724 stops by police officers utilizing the stop and frisk practice. Stop and frisk doesn't require any evidence. All you need is the suspicion that someone is up to no good. That is nearly 2,000 stops a day. The majority of these stop and frisks occurred in communities of color. People of color make up more than 60% of the prison population, yet they only represent 39.9% of the United States population. For a long time, I figured racism was just people being mean. As I've demonstrated in my speech today, it's much deeper than that. As human beings, it's important that we call attention to systemic racism because ignoring these issues has not changed anything. In order to move forward, we have to learn from our past transgressions and try to make things better. I encourage you to do more research, to listen to Black voices, to dive into Black history, not just the history they have in the books. I mean, really deeply dive in. Have you heard about Black Wall Street? I didn't until a couple years ago. It's important that we educate ourselves if we want to move forward. It's important that we hold our elected officials accountable for their actions. This isn't something new, and maybe you're tired of hearing it, but Black people are tired of experiencing it. Thank you.